You're listening to Finding Your Genius Zone with Dirk Nevelle. With the help of successful individuals across industries, Dirk breaks down the unknown parts of every vocation while highlighting the importance of finding a career where you can leverage your natural skills, passions, and interests. Now here's your host, Dirk Nevelle.
Everybody, this is Dirk Nevelle. Welcome to my podcast. On with me today is Emily Cherkin. Emily, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Thank you. So Emily, I always do a little intro. I don't know Emily. I've just met her. We were talking a little bit. We do have some friends, some contacts. She knows my mom, my stepdad. Emily, it's interesting. Emily kind of came into my iPhone life in terms of a text. My wife sent me information on Emily about a topic that she is a Screentime Consultant. And that is an issue that is really hot with my wife and I, just because we're battling that really hard with our son, who's 16. And even, I'll be honest, even sometimes I find myself waking up in the morning, reaching for my phone, like a cup of coffee. But it is a really interesting topic. So Emily is an expert at that. I'm going to let her talk about how she got into it, what it's like. And then I also kind of just really want to focus in on what Emily's done. She's taken something that's really, she's passionate about, and she's turned it into a career. And I want to get into that as well. So Emily, I will let you maybe start it off. I always do this. You're sitting at a Starbucks and having a cup of coffee and someone asks you what you do. How would you respond?
Well, thank you. Yes, I start by saying I'm a former teacher, and I got into the work that I'm doing now in part because of what I witnessed in the classroom, the change. So I started teaching in 2003 and I left the classroom in 2015. And what I saw in that time was a real shift in how technology was used. So in two very distinct ways. Like initially it was my students coming into the classroom saying, I saw this thing on Facebook and, oh, there was this party and I was left out of it, or somebody's being mean to me online. And I did a lot of the preaching at them, well, you shouldn't post things and you shouldn't write this. At the same time, it was so developmentally appropriate. That's what seventh graders do in real life. No wonder they're doing this online. And at the same time, I was also being asked as a teacher to move my grading and my teaching planning and my lesson work onto a digital platform. And what I noticed was kids were impacted by what was happening online in their personal and social lives, and it was trickling into the school day. And then because I was being asked to do more as a teacher online, my students stopped coming to talk to me about things that were happening, whether it was why did I get a B on that quiz? Or what do I need to do to make up this assignment? They would just go online. And then another layer of that would be parents started emailing me. And so what I witnessed was a displacement of some really important skills that I thought kids were needing and not getting. And this is a really long Starbucks conversation because I'm also a parent. And I realized as a parent that this quote unquote screen time challenge is very real, is not going away, is gotten harder, especially post sort of lockdown and pandemic, and that just sort of added fuel to the fire. So yeah, my passion is really about just helping families understand what's going on and providing really practical, tangible solutions to help them move through it, but recognizing we as adults have our own work to do too.
Yeah, definitely. So again, there's two angles. There's let's talk about screen time, the issues, the things we think we know that we don't know. And then let's also talk about what it's like to, you went to New York. I think you were pursuing law, and then you decided to get into teaching so you could be preventative, kind of get in early, deal with helping people instead of reacting to situations. Yes. And then this kind of came up naturally, which I love. So a lot of my audience probably are thinking, they're younger adults, they're 24, 25, maybe they're high school. They've lived their whole life on these little things, right? So they don't know any different. Yeah. It's kind of like, it's all they know. What is it, and a lot of times I give my son advice or my daughter and they're like, hey, Dad, I know. But what is it like in a way that you could, what don't they know about how this could potentially harm them or is harming them, or maybe just kind of impact their life?
I think the biggest difference between the childhood that people who are older than 30 had and the current generation of young adults is what you're saying, right? To grow up in a world post-internet, right? So I have a memory of a childhood without it, and it was a great childhood. And the biggest difference, I hear this all the time. People are like, well, I watched TV when I was a kid and I turned out fine. Or I played video games when I was a kid in the 80s, right? And the reality is there's one really, really big fundamental difference. Well, more than one. But the one I always think about is this concept of persuasive design, right? The fact that not only are we accessing these things much more easily, right? It didn't, you used to have to wait a week to watch the next episode of your TV show, right? Like that's gone, right? That doesn't exist really in the same way. But it's the fact that the platforms that we use, the apps that we interact with, the games that we play are designed to keep us on them longer because the business model of the technology industry relies on advertising. And, the longer our eyeballs are on the screen or in the app, the more money the company makes. And that's not a secret. That's the reality. And so there's no incentive to decrease our use of it because that would decrease bottom line for companies. And so technology companies have hired developmental psychologists to make their apps more appealing, especially for children. And I always take the issue that, look, if you're an adult, theoretically, you make your choices, you make your decision, you live your life. But the brain is not fully developed until we're well into our 30s. And so to me, that's manipulative and problematic when we have technology tapping into neural networks and increasing dopamine and making us feel good when we're on. It's a reason why, we open an app and refresh our email and there's nothing and we immediately close it and open it again, right? Like we are all susceptible and vulnerable to that. And so it's one thing when it's an adult issue. I take particular issue when it's with children because children's brains are not adult brains.
Yeah. So again, this is kind of a different flavor of podcast that I do. Again, we'll get into the career, but I'm so interested in this topic. How do I say this? I'm 53. I've got a lot of my friends on social media, the different platforms. I'm on them. I don't think I'm on them a lot, but I see the same people. And I guess without saying anything negative, it's so interesting to me, the need for validation, especially some of the people that I know, like it's like a bottle of booze. And initially I'm triggered. I'm like, okay, we don't want to see what you ate. We don't, but like there's such a need to be heard. And now all of a sudden people have an audience and a lot of people maybe don't deserve an audience. Like, and I don't mean that bad, but they just like, nobody cares. But like, there's such a need for people to kind of let people know about their life. Mm-hmm. And my question is that something that you think would have been around back in the day? Like, is that just a psychological need that we all want to be loved and we all want to be heard? Or is there something going on that's different? Like, is this what these people are doing? They're programming ways to like the dopamine and the hit. I mean, what is going on? Like I know you can get real technical, but for the masses, how would you explain this phenomena?
It's both of those things. It is true that humans have always wanted and needed connection, right? We're social creatures. We depend on others for survival. That's normal. That's eons of existence. The problem is that social media in particular, but there's other forms of it online, it just inflames that need, right? Because we get that receptive audience. And so one of the things about the design element that is so pernicious is that when it's called the dopamine feedback loop, right? And we've all experienced it. We just may not have the term for it, right? It's like, you spend time engaging and then you wait for the like or the share or the comment, right? And meanwhile, our brain is like primed. We're like the rat pushing the lever, right? Like we want the treat. The treat comes in the form of that social feedback. Right. But what's crazy is that our brains are so amazing, they adapt. And so they adapt to that next level of dopamine. And in order to get that same feel-good thing again, we have to engage for longer. So that's one of the problems. It's not that we need the feedback from our peers. It's now that in order to get the same good feeling from that experience, we have to engage longer with that content. And to me, that's the problem. I mean, adults, as you point out, like we are really guilty of being on them probably more than we should, right? Or scrolling longer than we need to. And we're susceptible to it too. And I think, again, I worry so much about children who are very vulnerable to social feedback, right? I mean, I taught middle school for 12 years. That the name of the game in middle school is what do other people think of me? And how do I come out as cool and, confident when in fact they're all deeply insecure, right? So that's worrisome to me.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Okay. So I'm thinking about the podcast in terms of like people, they struggle. A lot of people struggle. I struggled many of my years just trying to figure out what the heck I want to do in my life. And a lot of the voices in my head, I don't think really subconsciously my voices. And now with the social media, I think you see like influencers or you see these beautiful people, you know, and you think that's normal. And I wonder how this screen time issue that we're discussing, do you think it impacts how people choose careers?
Very much so. I know there's been some research of children over different generations asking like what they want to be when they grow up, right? And they have international surveys of this too. And one of the things American children are increasingly saying are things like, I want to be an influencer or a YouTube star. Well, people might say, well, that's like, 20 years ago, people said, I want to be a basketball, an NBA star, right? Like, which I would argue it's still aspirational, but like you have to actually work really hard to be a basketball. Like you have to work out and you have to like play basketball. And it's not that there aren't skills involved with being an influencer, but I would argue that it's a lot more of that external feedback and a lot less of the intrinsic motivation to go and do something because you're passionate about it. And I'm sure people will disagree with me on that, but I think, again, the problem for when it comes to children is, especially for younger people today, is that there is no comparison. You and I can look back at the analog childhoods we had and remember a time when social feedback was just limited to the group of people we were hanging out with. It wasn't hundreds of people on a platform giving feedback about my outfit or my friendship or whatever. And that is really what is changing children's perception of themselves and of each other. I had one parent tell me that her daughter spent hours online trying to find products to fix all of the things that were wrong with her because of how she was getting this feedback online. And it's not that those insecurities didn't exist again 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. It's that we now have this platform that's both permanent and magnifying those feelings and experiences. And we know, the Surgeon General said last year that there is a mental health crisis among young people, that it is truly a crisis. And I personally believe it's a direct through line to increased use of social media at very vulnerable ages, in development.
So the magic question is, how do you fix it? How do you, it's like, I can't see us taking out phones, right? What's the recipe in your opinion for success on trying to help these young kids, even adults? I know adults that are on all the time, post 5 times a day. Yeah. And anyway, what do you think? Like, you're bringing up an issue, but I also know part of your consulting is like, what's the ROI on this?
Absolutely. Well, my tagline is I want to build a movement of tech intentionality. And so I always say I'm not anti-tech, I'm tech intentional. Obviously, I have a phone, I use a computer, I have social media accounts. However, the way I approach it is just like anything else, it's about balance. And, even though the design elements can make screen use addictive, so does alcohol, right? Like, so do other substances that tap into those neural pathways. And it has to do, it's so tricky because I'm very wary of ever blaming parents solely. I always say this isn't parents' fault, but it is our responsibility. And so the tech companies have made our jobs harder, right? Like as parents, but at the same time, we have a responsibility to be the mentor and the role model for our children. And so one of the solutions is to start by looking at our own use. It's like, if you have kids and you're telling them don't do X, Y, and Z online, but you're doing the same thing, or you're putting your phone in your bedroom at night, but telling them they can't, that's not going to work. And so the approach I take is, I always say, like, it's rather than this combative head-to-head conflict, which is so typical around screen time issues, it's like, how do we approach this together as a problem-solving unit? And one of my favorite advice tips to give parents and people in general, this is not even just for parents, is to live your life out loud. And it's what it sounds like, which is just, I'm narrating what I do as I do it when it comes to screen. So I say, I'm reaching for my phone, I'm opening my Instagram app, I'm scrolling because I'm bored. Oh my gosh, this person's posting 5 times a day. That makes me feel like I'm not posting enough. This like literal play-by-play commentary. And I always tell parents, especially if you have teens, you know it's working when they're rolling their eyes at you, right? Because they're listening. And teen rolling eyes is completely developmentally normal, and we have to not take it personally as parents. Hard, but true. And so by living our lives out loud as adults, the hope is that we're doing a lot of things, right? We're modeling how we use the tech. We are modeling what skills we get from it. We're showing the intentional use. Like, I might be pulling this up to find a map to get to a place and see what the traffic is. That's very different than me saying I'm just watching TikTok videos, you know? So I always say, like, these phones are not switchblades, they're Swiss Army knives. And our kids don't know that when they're young. What they see is the back of our device, right? So the more we can inform and educate them and then model that ourselves, the better, right? Like, so that's one tip. I mean, I've got lots, but that's,
Sure.
Everyone can do that. It's free and you can start it today.
No, I like it. I totally with you on that. Especially when you see like families sitting at a dinner table and they're all on their phone. And I'm like, wow, what a great conversation you guys are having.
Yeah.
The other part of this though is like, it's almost like a child that has ADHD or something. Like sometimes you get angry at your child for forgetting something.
Yeah.
And you're like, why can't you just do this? And then at the end of the day, they just might not be able to. They just don't have the ability.
Yeah.
So with the phones, like I'll get angry at my son who's on it and I've limited his time. But like, I almost feel like it's a drug that he can't, like my words, my actions, all of the above will mean something. But I almost feel like what these technology companies have done is they've given them crack. And I don't know how to get rid of the drug without getting rid of the phone. And so I guess one of the questions is like, is someday are we going to see like major like lawsuit against these companies for doing what they've done? Because I feel like they've robbed children of, you know, when I was young, I would go build hydroplanes and drag them behind my bike, or I'd go build a tree fort, or I'd go, you know, you name it. I'd go sell lemonade, or I would do whatever. I'd go play football. It's like these kids are being robbed of not only social skills of just being able to go out and get creative, but they get bored so damn easy if they don't have their phone. And I feel like this is a big deal. And I kind of want to see, I don't want to say heads roll, but I want to see someone pay for this. And it's not changing. I don't think anything's changing. Like, do we have is this like big pharma? There's no way to fight them?
No, there is a way. I'm with you on this. A big part of the work I do is activism around, my focus has historically been on screens in schools, because that's a whole nother topic we haven't even talked about. You know, like there's the devices kids are bringing into school, their personal phones, but then schools are increasingly requiring kids to use tech for school, whether that's iPads or one-to-one laptop programs or online learning management or grading programs. It is awful. And I will say that maybe there are a few exceptions to some of those. Again, I'm not anti-tech, but on average, schools use 125 unique ed tech platforms per school. There is no way that a district can monitor and understand and know what's going on with each of those distinct platforms. And one of the concerns I have, and my activism is around the data privacy piece of this too, because these are third-party companies that are siphoning data about minors and selling it for profit. And at the end of the day, I am not okay with that. I think most parents have no clue that this is going on. And even districts don't have always full awareness of what it is. You know, a lot of them are cash strapped or they're budget issues, right? And so they have a tech company approach them and say, oh, I've got a solution for you. You've got oversized classes. Like, here's this platform that will help you differentiate your instruction. And, you know, it's this big shiny thing that sounds really great. And, you know, the research is not there to support most of it's better. I mean, my TLDR is later is better, less is more, relationships before screens. That's it. Those are the three things that we need to go into this issue with. And so I am an activist. It's a few days away, but there's a lawsuit coming. Let me just say that. And there are other lawsuits, like there are some lawsuits, ironically, some districts have sued social media companies about youth mental health, which I like to see pushback. But the problem to me is districts are also using ed tech platforms. So it's like, I call it digital whack-a-mole, right? Because you like knock one thing and another thing pops up. And I'm an optimist. I believe I wouldn't wake up in the morning and fight this fight if I didn't think it mattered. It's definitely a David and Goliath, but then somebody pointed out David won. So, I think you said big pharma. I see this also as big tobacco, except kids were not like young children, like 8-year-olds weren't smoking cigarettes. We were talking, teenagers might have been, but like this is a very pervasive problem. And the problem also is that it changes very rapidly, right? And technology moves so quickly and legislation moves very slowly, right? So that's one of the problems is we've got this big disconnect in pacing. And that's worrisome. I mean, to be quite direct, I believe this is a matter of democracy, protecting civil institutions. I believe that there is real threat to civil society if we don't address it.
Yeah, when you use those words, I start thinking about AI, and I talk about AI because AI, replacing careers, creating careers. But with the advancement of AI, it's going so fast that we don't even know where it's taking us.
Right.
I wonder how that is going to make the problem worse.
Yeah, and AI isn't really even new. It's just that we're much more aware of it, and it's moving again really fast. And we're seeing, people will say like, "Well, AI in the classroom is going to ruin." Kids are going to cheat. Kids were cheating before AI. Like even before the internet, kids were cheating. The irony to me is that the antidote to this problem of cheating and using tech and AI to do that is go back to paper. You don't have to paper isn't connected to the internet. And, one of my daughter's teachers sent home they have a 1-to-1 program at the school with a laptop. And the language in the syllabus said, students who misuse district technology will be required to perform learning tasks on paper. The punishment for misusing tech is paper, which is mind-boggling to me, right? Because it is absurd in my mind to expect a 12-year-old to make good decisions. I mean, see our previous conversation about middle school and impulse and right? Like it is mind-boggling to me that we put the onus of this on children and then we get them in trouble for it, right? So I think less is more. I mean, I am definitely fighting that. I think there are two, schools need to have no phone policies. And I believe up through high school at this point, I have heard too many stories. It is not good for anybody. There's no benefit. And I'm sure there are going to be people who come at me with, but what about? The exception to this, and I have a family member with diabetes, for example, that the phone is a medical device. Well, of course, but just because one kid has a medical device doesn't mean all kids need to bring that device to school, right? Like just because one kid needs glasses doesn't mean every kid should have glasses. And so to me, that's the exception, not the rule. And then we have to get ed tech out of education and out of maybe not 100%, but maybe 95% out. I don't think it makes it better. And that's not something people are going to agree with me on.
No. I think one of the battles you have too, and I don't mean this bad, but I say what I say what I feel. Yeah. I think a lot of parents, life's hard, right? For a lot of people, and not to play the victim card, but people are struggling, especially right now in this market. And I don't say parents are lazy, but phones are like free babysitting. Like I know that parents just kind of like when the kid's on the phone, they can do their thing or whatever. Yeah. And if they didn't, then they have to be a parent, or maybe they have to. And I feel like you're going to be battling parents in a way, in a subtle, subconscious way. They may not admit it, but like I see a lot of parents not wanting to give the phones up because it kind of is easy parenting.
100%. And this is to me why this threatens democracy. Because if we're not willing to have the uncomfortable, difficult conversations that come with being a parent, that's parenting. Sorry, that's just what it is. No one was like, I'm going to be a parent because I heard it was easy, right? If we're not willing to do that, then kids are never held accountable, or adults for that matter. Kids don't understand consequences. Kids don't have to think critically about choices that they're making. Yeah. I said this the other day in a video, like, technology is promoted as being frictionless. Like it's a good thing. It makes everything easier. And it is true that there are some ways in which that's true. But the problem is that it is in the friction that learning happens. It's in the difficult moments where we struggle that we change our opinion or we shift our thinking or we add to our knowledge base. By putting tech in school, by relying on phones and iPads as babysitters all the time, we are robbing children of opportunities to build those skills. Now, again, I am not going to shame and blame parents. But again, like I said, it's not our fault. It is our responsibility. And I know that this is hard for some families. And I always say it's an 80-20 rule for the most part. Like, okay, yeah, my kids have screens sometimes. Like, it's not absolutist here. And recent research, and I felt very validated when I read this study because it's exactly what I've been saying for years, which is there are actually the wrong questions to ask are how much screen time is too much and what parental controls do you use? Those are the wrong questions to ask. The right questions to ask are, do you know what your child is doing online? And do you have a good relationship with them? Those are direct predictors of future mental health for children. And to me, that makes perfect sense because kids are going to be online. Even if, and I hear this all the time, my kid doesn't have a phone, but they have a smartwatch. Or their buddy on the bus next to them is showing them YouTube videos, or they have some access at school. It is not a question of if children see bad stuff online, it's when. They will. And the most important thing is, do you have a relationship with them where they will come and tell you? That they can say, hey, Dad, I saw this video. It made me really uncomfortable, or I don't understand it, or I don't know what to do. That is what matters. And so it's not about the total number of hours. It's the piece of it. And every kid's different. That's the problem too, is it's not a one size fits all. It's like one kid's going to react very differently than another.
I love that because I was going to ask you the questions that I shouldn't ask what you just said. But like at the end of the day, I'm thinking, what is Noah spending time on, when the door's closed? And would he come to me if he saw something that disturbed his peace or triggered him or confused him? Yeah. And I think that's really good insight. So we're going to get into the career a little bit beyond the topic. But my last question, I think, on screen time is, what is your guess on if we fast forward 20, 30 years and we take this population of kids that have grown up on technology, what do you think, what are those people going to be like? Like, not everybody, but like, what do you think our society, like, what is the effect? Is it, for example, people don't have very good communication skills? They're not used to interacting. They're not used to the friction and dealing with the friction. And so then they just put their hands up in the air and like, I don't know what the hell to do. Like, what's your gut on what this means 20, 30 years down the road?
That's a great question. And there is a cynical part of me that's like, well, we'll all be microchipped by then anyway. So who knows? I'm an optimist. So, and to me as a teacher, I think the answer is in education. I think it is in part why the activism I do, I feel is really important, because protecting institutions like schools where children are taught things like critical thinking is really, 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 really important as an antidote to the potential harms that could come from too much of this. And, again, it's not that I don't think AI might serve a really valuable purpose in medicine or, other uses. But we want people as young adults growing up to understand that there's, for good and for evil, right? Like that technology in the hands of different people can be weaponized or used for good, right? And so how do kids know that? It's going to be because they've learned how to think critically, ask questions, and there's a lot of work to do around that. And again, I say parents, it's not your fault, but it's our responsibility. And so it's got to be at home too. So that's a great question. What will it actually look like? I think about how exponentially things have changed even just in the last 5 years. It's hard to imagine, even with the pandemic, like how much that changed things even more. And I see this. I think the last thing I would add to this is that childhood is lasting longer than it used to. There was a story recently about how today's 18-year-olds are much more emotionally mature as an equivalency to like our 14-year-old years. That kids are getting driver's licenses later, they're leaving home later, they're getting jobs later. They're like all of this delayed independence, which actually makes sense because our lifespans are also expanding, right? So that childhood is kind of increasing into the early 20s, which also makes sense from a brain standpoint, right?
Yeah.
But we as a society haven't adjusted to that. And I do really worry about these kids not having these experiences with difficulty and, struggle when they're young is setting them up for some pretty serious anxiety as adults. So, yeah.
I think about like, you have a placebo group, you have a country of kids that never grew up with it.
Yeah.
And then you have next door, you have a country of what we have now. And then in 20, 30 years, I wonder what the differences between those two societies would be. I mean, who knows? But
that's a great question.
So getting into, so we've talked a lot about the content, the topic, and now I want people to be kind of looking at you and understanding, so Emily looked in the world of being a lawyer. She was in teaching for a long time. And then she saw an issue with something she was really passionate about, and she wanted to fix it, help. So I guess the question is, I want to get into what it's like to construct. I have a passion. I was thinking of another example, and then I want to turn it into a business.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about that process, and keep in mind, like, whether it's screen time or whether it's, salsa, making salsa or whatever ideas somebody has, or maybe somebody wants to take on big pharma, or they want to create a vaccine or a shot to test children to see if they can even handle these shots. Yeah. Whatever the passion is, talk to us about that process and think about the person listening that is interested and they have a passion like you and they want to turn it into a career.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think I would start by saying it's obviously identifying the passion. What do you care about? Like, what gets you out of bed in the morning? And then what's the problem that needs solving? And, coming from a teaching background versus a business background, I definitely entered the world of like business terminology. And I was like, what is all these like ROI and KPI, like all these acronyms I had never heard of. And it was a steep learning curve. But I will say that, teaching is marketing. Parenting is marketing. Like, business marketing is marketing, right? Like, it's how you tell the story and share what you care about with people. And for me, a lot of that comes from writing. My book is almost out, and I just do a lot of blog writing. And so that has been a way for me to communicate. But I couldn't build a business by myself. Like, I immediately knew I needed external help. And, my husband has a degree in business, and full disclosure, works in the tech industry, by the way. Like, I'm married to the problem. And he was helpful in getting that started. And I've hired different consultants, and I have, now I have a team of people that help me. But part of it was realizing where my strengths were, like what can I do well, and what can I outsource to people who can do it better, so that I can focus on what I'm good at. So
a lot of what I try to get young adults or people to do is really try to center in on the easy, obvious, the why, like what lights you up, what makes you a better version of yourself. What do you gravitate towards on a weekend, right? Like, I love farming. I love planting trees. I love, my wife and I have animal. I love being on my property.
Yeah.
It feels good. Your why, what's the why here? Is the why, and I ask that too, because I also want young people or whoever, if you're in your 40s or 50s and you're thinking about something different, like, do you have any advice on are really defining and getting rid of those other voices? Like, and that's, again, what we're talking about is the validation of social media. And like, people think they want to be an attorney or a doctor, or they need to be an influencer, or they want to be a realtor because they saw, this reality TV show, and it's just not real. And so how do you get through all that crap and really define the why? And like, maybe you can talk about how you did it.
For me, I firmly believe I am fighting for kids' future mental, emotional, physical, and cognitive health. That's my why. And part of that comes from my passion as a teacher, and also as a parent. Like, you kind of would do anything for your kids, and I want to do that for all kids. So that's my why. I think initially I thought that I would get that by being a teacher, and I loved teaching, and that was an incredibly important experience. It comes up all the time in my work. But what I realized was when I was talking, my aha moment was talking to my students about all of this, at the time it was Facebook. And I was like, you really shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that. And they were like, but Emily, our parents are doing this. Our parents are texting and driving. Our parents are playing Candy Crush or scrolling through social media. So it's not just us. And that was when I was like, oh, the problem isn't, I said, my aha moment was, this isn't a kid problem. This is an adult problem impacting children. And so in order to fix the problem, I need to help parents. That was kind of the way I shifted from being child focused to parent focused.
Yeah.
Sorry
about my cough, by the way.
No worries.
I just started getting it, so I apologize.
No problem.
I don't want to mess your flow up. So that's really interesting, because I think there's so much focus on these kids, but it's the parenting or the support system around them.
Adults. It's the adults. And I include parents and teachers in that, but I include technology company executives and I include school district administrators, right? Like, it's all of us. Like, I don't think we treat children particularly well. And, you can look at different countries and how their children are treated and treated, like, I mean that in a lot of different ways,
Yeah.
But I think kids kind of get it. Even your example of AI, there is emerging discussion and legislation and conversation about like needing to set like legal limits to protect society. And I think that's great. But why hasn't that happened with children and social media yet? Why is it taking so long to put limits on that for kids when it is truly harmful? Yeah, exactly. because kids don't, because of money, because of the business model, right? And,
yeah.
I think one thing I would add, I don't know how this fits in, but it's just popped in my brain, is like, the other thing about being a business owner, I think in my family growing up, we have a lot of teachers and a lot of like do-gooders, right? Like, we're going to change the world. And that's great. That's where my passion comes from. But I also remember growing up that I think if I had said I wanted to go into business, I might have been like looked down on. That was like a dirty word in my childhood, like being because it meant you were greedy and you were doing it for money. And that has been a voice in my head that I've had to overcome. And I think being a teacher, being a woman, has been another challenge in overcoming like how I price my offers, for example. Even with the expertise I have, I still struggle with imposter syndrome. I still struggle with who's going to pay for this? I don't know enough. I wish I had a PhD. I mean, all of this is like never enough. And one thing that I would say to aspiring business owners is to be in alignment with your values. And what I mean by that is, one thing that has become very clear to me in my work that separates me from others who do similar things to me is that I absolutely refuse to take any money from any technology company, app developer, platform. There are all kinds of affiliates things out there, and this is what you see, of course, through influencers all the time, right? That's how those companies make money, is by having influencers. I absolutely refuse to do that because it is out of alignment with my values. And I don't ever want someone to say she's doing this for the money, right? Yep. And I struggle with that too, because I also think it's okay for me to want to make a living on something I'm passionate about, And so it's a bit of a struggle there for me. But yeah, I don't know. I didn't answer a question, but that was a thought.
I love it. I love you said. I mean, like I told you before, like this, we can talk about whatever.
Yeah.
I think the attachment to money or the association. Oh gosh, I'm maybe a Republican. I'm greedy or whatever, or the stereotype or whatever. I see that a lot as roadblocks or stumbling, for people. Maybe that self-sabotage or the imposter syndrome or whatever. And I think it's really, I mean, that's just an example of, I think, and I don't know where I'm going on this, but you just being aware of it and seeing like a pattern of how your beliefs and your thoughts and maybe how they influence how you do things. But I think it's really good that you're aware of that, and not that I'm here to give advice, but I mean, we all deserve to make money, and go to Hawaii and, feel, safe from bill. I mean, whatever it is. Yeah. So I hope that you can work on that and get through that, because
I am. Yes.
Because this is much needed. I mean, this is, I think this, not to get too deep, but I mean, you're saving lives.
Thank you.
I mean, you really are. I mean, the kids who committed suicide based on the whatever. It's like, I mean, not to make this a sad podcast, but this is really effed up in terms of what this is doing to our kids. And our job is to protect them, but also let them fly and get experience friction and all that good stuff. So I'm not trying to like protect them too much, but this is a serious subject that is life-changing. So as far as it's interesting, you talked about being a teacher and then getting into the business world and all these damn acronyms. I mean, there's so many of them. I was in technology and I'm like, oh my God. I think the worst acronym. I worked at AT&T and there was a sales job and we sold to businesses and they kept asking us what our NIBR was. NIBR. And I hate that word. I've always it's net income billed revenue. And it was and I'm like, I have a friend, Heidi, she was on and we all joke like, how's your NIBR this month? And too many acronyms, but I guess, you telling yourself maybe, hey, I'm not business. I don't know if these are words that are in your head, but I think these are thoughts that a lot of my audience might have is I'm not smart enough. I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. I can't be successful in business. Like the friction that you went through and maybe are going through. Do you have any advice for somebody that, their parents are attorneys and they want to be an artist or they want to take care of horses or they want to whatever. Like what's your advice to somebody that in their heart, they have a direction they want to go, but the voices around them, their support staff or network are pushing them that way?
Well, number one, I'm a big fan of a good therapist. So I feel like everyone benefits when we have someone to process it with who's a neutral party, right? The other thing is like what I have found, and to be very clear, I am 5 years into business and I am still relying on the fact that my husband has a full-time income that we can live off of. Like, I don't want to set this as like, I mean, I consider what I've done to be successful to this point, but I'm not financially independent. And that's okay. I don't take shame in that. And I recognize the privilege I have that I have a partner who can support me. Yeah. But I also don't feel like this is work. I could easily spend 30 or 40 hours or 50 hours a week talking, writing, thinking, networking with people on this topic. And because it isn't a passion and in alignment with what I care about, it's easy. And I think that would be the advice is like, no matter what your family of origins messaging was, if something is if it's not in alignment with what kind of a life you want to lead, then that's not the path to take. And sometimes it means going down that path first to realize it. And that's I never think of, it's like your exes, it's like, I never think of my ex-boyfriends as wasted time. Like each one taught me what I didn't want or what I learned about that relationship. I
do. I think of them as I'm just kidding. But no, I get what you're saying. It's so cool what you're saying. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but what you're talking about right now is Genius Zone. And that's this whole Guy Hendricks wrote a book called The Big Leap.
I have it.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
And it's not my idea. I mean, I'm a big Guy Hendricks fan, or Gay Hendricks, excuse me. I always mess up names. My wife gives me a hard time on that. My dad used to say Washington instead of Washington. So maybe it's genetic. So I'll play the victim and say it's his fault. But that's what you're talking about. It's like when you're running a race that you want to win, and winning doesn't mean like just if you're running a race that you really love. I just think that's the definition of authentic success. And the money is a byproduct. And I have full confidence in time, that might come for you or to you. But that's what I'm trying to get people to pay attention to. So educate, but pay attention to, look at Emily, like she's in her flow. She could speak hours. And like I could do that with podcasts just because I'm curious. I love people that are in their flow. It's fun for me to feed off that energy and hear it. I think that's what the audience needs to pay attention to is you can run a race, make money that and maybe in a job you hate, or you can maybe take a couple steps back and take inventory of what lights you up, what you're passionate about, and then maybe try to build a career around that.
Yeah. And I think another thing that I really struggled with in the beginning of the business was like the hustle. I think that's the part of the business world that I was really resistant to being in. And at first I felt like I'm supposed to do that. but it was very out of alignment with how I operate as a person. And it took me doing it and feeling really icky to say, actually, that's not the way I have to do it. And I've never been somebody who does it the way everybody else does it. I am very much going to do it my own way. And that's okay. And what that meant was accepting that I was going to grow slow. I am much slower growing than my first business coach would have wanted me to be. I think he thought I could be at, whatever numbers in a year if I just hustle. I don't cold call. I don't cold outreach because it was so uncomfortable for me. I benefit from relationships. And what's been fascinating is that the early investment I've made in relationships with people, whether that was through my activism or my teaching days or my parent communities, is now I see that I'm reaping the benefits of that investment in terms of how those people are coming back to me and supporting me in new ways. So I had to take the long view. And I think that's one thing about business. And I think that was the gift of being a teacher and being able to kind of take the longer view, maybe. I think there is that hustle culture in business, and it doesn't have to be that way. And again, fully recognize I couldn't do this without the support of a partner, but it wouldn't feel right if that's how I had built this. That I take a lot of pride in the integrity of my business, and that is the authentic relationships I build with people. And that's through conversation. I mean, it's legwork for sure. But even just now, as I'm like sending copies of my book to people, I'm like digging into that email inbox and I'm like, gosh, I had this great conversation with someone 5 years ago and I'm going to send them a copy of my book because you never know, right? Like that to me, I can see that long-term trajectory is paying off and paying off, in terms of feeling really my business foundation is, I don't know, and not even monetarily. I mean, in terms of its integrity. I think that's an important word to me.
Yeah, I love that because I had another guest, and what we always do is a thumbnail of the person and then a sentence below, kind of a piece of advice or something that stuck out. And what you're saying is like, and I'm trying to talk less, I'm not trying to talk about me, but like in my job, I'm in real estate lending, and all the things that I did, my coaches, my friends, my neighbors, the relationships that I built from, and I'm 53, but going back to when I was 10, it translates to potential clients, and so I guess what I'm saying is what I hear you saying is don't take for granted what you're doing now and what you have done in terms of how you might be able to leverage that in the future in terms of a career.
Exactly.
Like they're building blocks. Exactly. And I love that. As we wind down, Emily, is there anything that's caught you off guard? I think 2018, 19 is when you started this, but in your heart and your head, you probably started it a long, long time ago. Just, on paper, the business license might say something. So is there anything that surprised you about, starting a business, being a consultant around a topic that you're, really into that you might want to, like if you had a child that's 25 and they say, hey, I want to save the seals, or I want to, whatever, is there some kind of advice you might give based on something that's caught you off guard that you might wish you knew more about before you got into it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's going to sound very cliche, but like I said, I don't regret anything that I've done because it all was a teachable moment, in those unpleasant, not so great experiences, I got something from it. And tangentially, I think I would add, I'm a big fan of conversations with other people, and both because I like it, but because it's an analog, the in real life conversations. And so any opportunity you have, like you do with podcasting, to talk to other people about what they do is really a valuable way to learn about what might work for you and what might not. And to, think about like the people you admire and what kind of and I don't mean like as a hero worship, but like, for example, Brene Brown, who I'm sure many of your listeners know of. I used to say, I want to be the Brene Brown of Screentime. And then someone said, well, why don't you be the Emily Cherkin of Screentime? And I was like, yeah. And I love what she built. I love how she has a small business company that, it's not like this massive, I'm not going to be a big corporation. I know that. That's not who I am, but doesn't mean I can't be successful, right? It doesn't mean I can't work towards a sustainable life that, it's the investment in something I care about and then I can support my family on, right? Like those are important things. So yeah.
I love it. You remind me, I've gotten to know some pretty cool people through a good friend of mine. I'm in this coaching group and we have these meetings where we'll bring somebody in. And years ago, I got to spend a week with Joe Dispenza, who's a big meditation guy. And then he came to one of our events and I've always wanted to be the Joe Dispenza of something,
there you go.
Just because I love him. But then you're right. Maybe I just need to be the Dirk Nevelle of something. But, Robert Breedlove is another guy that I got to know who's big on talking about Bitcoin. And he's very, very interesting guy, very smart. But I love, you're kind of that person for screen time. And I think that Brene is great, but I think you're right. I think you need to change the words and the phrase. It's been really great listening to you. I know that I know so little and there's so much more. If you have parents that are watching this, maybe they're not interested in starting a business like you, but they're really interested in screen time. What's the best way for them to kind of take the next step?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I know the irony is that I have a digital presence. So my website is thescreentimeconsultant.com. Okay. And my hope is that there is information accessible to everyone at all price points, because again, I believe, like you said, this is a topic that everyone needs to hear about and benefit from. My book is coming out January 9th.
What's it called?
It's called The Screentime Solution, a judgment-free guide to becoming a tech-intentional family.
Wait, that's not out yet?
It's not out yet. You got an advanced copy.
Okay, so I'm I've got that. I'm well, how the heck did that happen?
Yeah, no, you got an early, it's January 9th release date. So okay. I've been sending out early copies, hoping, again, to get connected to people I can talk about it with. And the hope is that it's kind of the judgment-free guide parents need to sort of navigating screen time. And I wrote it knowing that screen time is going to change. So I tried to keep it more specific to the parenting approach and things that we can do even as technology changes, right? Because you don't want to write a book that's out of date in a year, right? So that was very much top of mind when I was writing it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then so obviously they can read your content. They can probably hire you for consulting, even one-on-one.
Yep.
You probably have workshops where you speak at.
Yep. Presentations for schools or PTA, education nights. I love doing those. That's another great opportunity. Yeah. I am on social media.
Are there any tests I love the Enneagram. I don't know if you know what that is. It's a personality.
Oh, yeah.
So do you know what type you are?
I'm a 1.
Okay. Is that Challenger? No, that's 8. That's 8. What's 1 is what is I'm 4.
I feel like it's, let me think. I'll look it up really quick. Enneagram Reformer.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah,
that is so spot on. That personality, it's there's the DISC, Myers-Briggs, but the Enneagram, I went to a weekend seminar on that and got really deep on it. And it is really accurate.
Do you know about human design?
I think I do, but probably I don't.
Well, I found her on the interweb, but there's this woman and it's similar. It's sort of like Enneagram and, astrology. It's kind of a mishmash of a bunch of stuff, but to me, that human design, I actually ordered a blueprint of it's based on your birth year, date, time, location, star chart, all of that. It is so spot on. It is eerie. And she does this wonderful job of presenting here's how this shows up for you in your professional life. And so I have my little thing written on my wall here. And I look at it often as it says you're designed to be a leader, a visionary, and a guide. And I look at that and I go, okay, that's what I'm doing. That's who I am. So,
I'd love to. Is that a test you take or a?
Yeah. So the woman I use is Erin Claire Jones. I'll try to send you her.
Cool.
Her website is just erinclairejones.com. I know there are other people who do it. I just love her format. I think, and I don't take any affiliate kickback for saying that.
No, it's cool. Hey, and if you did, if you believe in it and you took a kick, I mean, what's wrong with that? I mean, if you truly believe in it, I think where I was going on that is have you ever thought about any kind of test or for you, for a parent to say, Do I have a problem, or am I okay, or I'm in the danger zone? Like, is there anything that you have like that?
That's a great question. No, I don't is a short answer. I know there are some other, I know there's like addiction tests where you can say like, are you addicted to your phone kind of tests? What you're asking is actually more nuanced, right? Like as a parent or for my child. And I wonder, see, this is me in my brain. I'm like, I would have to do some research about how
no problem.
If I did.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but like, I think the question that you asked was brilliant, and it's making me think, do I know what Noah is actually spending time watching versus, worried about the screen limits? It's like, what the heck is he? I mean, he might be spending time on reading the Bible. I mean, I know he's not, but but that's a big one. Okay, well, so I've asked you along the way multiple times, but if there is one piece of advice, like, and let's just say it's to the parents, and maybe it's to someone in college that thinks they have all the answers and they grew up and they don't know any better. What is your passive? You used a word, I forgot what it was, but you don't want to cram it in their face. You don't want to make them feel like shame them, right? Because it is what it is. It's what they know. But what is your advice in a loving, subtle way to maybe make sure that this doesn't become a problem? The
screen time piece?
Yeah, in terms of what it will do to, even intimacy in a relationship with husbands or wives, looking at whatever. I mean, there's a million different ways it can mess up life. So it doesn't have to be just, games and Candy Crush.
Sure.
What is your advice to people just to be like, it's even like if you're saying it for people who are drinking, be aware of, how many drinks you're having a night, or are you drinking alone? Like, what's your advice on the screen time?
I have the perfect answer, and I'm going to give you a short story to illustrate it. The phrase I'm going to use is replace judgment with curiosity. Okay. And the reason I say that is because when I took a mindfulness class with my husband, this was before we had children and had time to take mindfulness classes. I laugh now because like, what? No, like once a week. We didn't have time with kids. But this teacher said that, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is such a great line. I think I felt judged a lot during my life, and I've been judgmental of others, and that doesn't move you anywhere when you just judge others or yourself. And so I went and I had it engraved on a keychain for my husband. And I picked it up at the engraver and I brought it home, and my cousin was over and I was like, look, I made this. And she was like, Emily, you spelled judgment and curiosity wrong. I was a literal 7th grade English teacher at the time. And I was so embarrassed. Now, P.S., those words are rather weird to spell. And it was totally my fault. I filled the form out and the engraver did what I asked. But it was such an aha moment of like, I can laugh about this because I can be curious about why are these words hard to spell? And like, you're so dumb. How could you do this? You're an English teacher. You shouldn't make mistakes like that. So that's what I would say about, kind of anything in life, but especially your own screen use. Like, start with you, stop the judgment, get curious. Why is it that when I roll over in the morning, I'm picking up my phone? Why is it that when I'm bored at the grocery store and I'm waiting in line, I scroll? Why do I feel the need to post pictures 5 times a day? And what would happen if I didn't? Like, to just explore the question without necessarily committing to the action yet, And I think, to me, again, that goes back to the critical thinking piece, right? Like, we just sort of go to these like quick fixes, and I just don't believe in that. It's actually why with my one-on-one coaching, I won't work for 1 session. It's 8 sessions minimum. And that's because it is not a quick fix. This is a long-term behavioral change parenting approach. And so some parents don't want to hear that. They want the quick fix. They just want me to tell them what app they could download and they'll be good. It's not going to work that way. And that's not in alignment with what I do. So that's okay. There's somebody else out there for you, and I'm not the right person. But starting with the curiosity of ourselves. And, I just feel like we need more of that in this world in general. Not just
that's. Yeah. I was joking about Joe Dispenza meditation, but a lot of what I've gotten good at is getting curious and aware of my thoughts. And as like clouds in the sky, not to get too deep, but like, a lot of times we think we are what we believe. And a lot of times they're not who we are. They're just a thought that's, coming in and it's leaving you. and you get curious about, okay, why did that come up? And so I think that's really good advice. One more question I'll have advice or a piece that I think is really interesting is what would you say to the person, and I have a lot of these people as friends on social media that just need constant validation. Like, and there's something that's missing inside them. Like they need to feel like they're seen or they're heard. Like, the person who posts, they broke up with their boyfriend and then they want to say something negative about men or just whatever. They just can't stop. Like, to me, it's like a disease. And I think deep down they know who they are, but like in a loving way, instead of shaming them and just saying, what would you say to those people that maybe are watching this and they know that they're part of that category of they just can't stay off? Like, is there any advice you would give? And these could be adults,
right,
and a lot of times there are.
They are. Yeah. Well, first thing I would say is that the algorithm encourages that. And so there's a reason we keep seeing it is because it gets clicks, it gets attention. Any attention on social media is good attention, even if it's negative, right? And to also then, again, I'm going to go back to an analog reaction. Like you can see it online and you can reach out in person, right? Like I think, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I have many people in my feeds that I see these same things from, and I can step back and sort of take that big picture. So then the question might be is like, is there a way I can just reach out to that person offline and say like, hey, you want to go get a coffee? Or like, how are you doing? Like, without having to like go into the whole, like, I see you're posting drama, right? And I think it goes back to relationships. I my TLDR, later is better, less is more, relationships first. And so go back to the relationship to be curious, like, how are you really doing? I think the performative nature of social media is that we do put up this, like, here's my great life, or here's my terrible life. And I need you to make me feel better about it. Right. And again, that's just a different form of that dopamine, right? We're getting the feedback, we're getting the attention that makes us feel better, but not really feel better. It's just, I think that's a hard thing. And so kind of getting curious again, and this is true whether it's friends or kids in our lives, like asking those open-ended questions. So even to your son, like, what are you doing online? It might just be like, tell me about the YouTube videos we're watching. Who do you like? Why do you admire that person? What is it that they're saying that appeals to you? Do you agree with everything? Because, here's the marketing part, right? You're just pitching critical thinking. You're teaching and modeling those skills that kids need to practice. And so, and it's without the judgment. I think that's, again, the judgment without, or the curiosity without the judgment is just really needed in this world right now of everyone and everything, to say like, and again, to get a little bit more into the weeds, like, I actually do follow people on social media that I don't agree with. And I get mad sometimes and I want to respond. And I also know that comment threads on the internet are not places to meaningfully engage. But I think it's important for me to know what other people are thinking and saying, because if I surround myself with an echo chamber that only for whatever end of the spectrum you're on, that does not make me a better critical thinker or a more empathic person. And so that's a big one. That's probably a whole nother podcast.
No, I think what social media has done is it's made us, I don't know how to say this. What's the word I'm looking for? It shows how lonely so many people are. And without it, they'd still be alone. Yeah. They just wouldn't have the audience. And now they can sit and have a couple cocktails and start, talking to the world. And it's sad because so many of these people they don't have a network or friends or whatever.
In real life.
In real life. And so I think that's a lot of what I see. And
yes, I agree.
I don't know. It's interesting because I get so surprised at the consistency of just the posting. And it's like, these people are adults. And I'm like, enough already. But I want to be loving about it and nice about it. But like, sometimes I want to pick up the phone and say something, but, and then I look at my own posts and I'm like, I think, for me, like, you have a cool family moment and you want to celebrate it because you love your kids or your son just had a great football game or something. But it's a very interesting topic that permeates like Everyone, me, my mom, all of the above. So anyways, I'm rambling. Emily, this was really awesome. I hope that, I think people learn a lot about screen time, but I think hopefully people also learn about the reality of taking a passion and creating a business. And I love what you said about friction, because I think friction is probably where the real work happens and the growth. And so good stuff.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. This has been a great conversation.
Thanks, Emily. Appreciate your time.